Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I am Pranay Kotasthane and today I have with me Malathi Renati. So today we are going to talk about a very interesting topic, women in sports in India and the policies related to it. But before we begin, I should mention that the applications for all our courses are open, our 48-week postgraduate program in public policy, and also for the 12-week program, which is GCPP. So all applications are open. Do check our website for learning more about public policy in a systematic manner and learning all the interesting things about Indian policy as well. So with that, let's begin today's conversation. So Malathi, before we get into the nitty-gritties of women in sports, etc., tell me about your sporting journey, because out of all the people in Takshashila, you're the only person who's played sports seriously at some level. So what all did you do?
Yeah, thanks, Pranay, for firstly having me on this podcast. I would say that my sporting journey, I should really thank my parents because my mom and dad both have played sports. Mom has been at the college level, badminton, throwball, a few other sports. My dad has also represented the senior level. He's represented the country. Of course, this is Zambia. That's where I grew up.
Right.
I spent most of my childhood. So I think just that exposure to sports from a very young age, where we used to play in backyard. My dad was a good hockey player along with football and other team sports. Exposure to team sports was the first exposure I had. And I think it was something that has helped me in many ways because sports is something that is a life skill at the end of the day. So when I look back now, I'm so happy that I have participated. Of course, when I came back to India, I did represent Karnataka in hockey, baseball and softball.
Wow, 3 sports. Okay.
Yeah, but I think the learnings and just that experience of playing as a team, though I have played individual sports as well, like table tennis, just that whole team spirit, right, that comes in one's playing sports is something that even now when I work with teams, I know that's helped me a lot. Apart from that, of course, things like analytical skills, fitness is one thing that I think sports is kind of helps us develop over time.
Correct. In economists speak, sport has many positive externalities. There are lots of benefits, not just to you, but to people around you and in ways that you are not able to think even at that time, right? You can't anticipate. Like you weren't playing with a view of improving your analytical capabilities, but that was the outcome at a later point of time. So it's a classic externality in that sense. But do you think the fact that your upbringing was in Zambia, was the sporting culture different there? Was sport more a part of your curriculum in your early school years? Was that a difference that you noticed?
Yes, I think definitely that made a huge difference because facilities there too were very good. Zambia, of course, was colonized by the British, so they had left behind quite a robust system. And we got an exposure to sports. It was part of our curriculum. So we used to finish school by around 3, and then the next 2 hours up till 5 was put aside for any extracurricular. And that involved everything from what we used to call rounders, which is very similar to baseball, to other individual sport as well. So I think that exposure makes a big difference when it's at a young age, and plus having the facilities definitely adds to it. But I think more important than that, having that support system is crucial. I was lucky that family was very supportive. My dad is someone who has always been encouraging me. I'm an introvert by nature. Thanks to sports, it's kind of helped me, kind of break my inhibitions when it comes to a lot of things. So I think, yes, definitely facilities are important and that made a difference. Yeah.
Right. So that's interesting, right? We touched upon 2-3 factors just from your story, right? One was the sporting infrastructure by the government, just the fact that you have some facilities, not just by government, but infrastructure as such. It can be private, it can be government. Second thing was your school had that time put out for sports. So that was about a cultural mindset that you do need this as an important part of your growing up. And the third thing you mentioned about your parents and the fact that society around you also has an impact on these decisions, right? So that's where we come into this part of the conversation, and this conversation at Tank Scrub, which is sort of a Takshashila tradition. Every Thursday morning we discuss many random topics related to public policy from across the world. And last week we had a very interesting discussion on women in sports, and what are the barriers in India, and what are some possible solutions. So Malathi had some very good points in that, and we thought we should open this discussion up to a lot more people beyond Takshashila. So Malathi, let's get into that. So what are some of the barriers you think for greater participation of women in sporting activities in India?
Yeah, so that's interesting, Pranay. In fact, there are many, but recent conversation that colleague of mine, Soumya Nandan, and I had with Aditi Mutatkar, who's a former international badminton player. So we were fortunate.
And incidentally, an alumna of GCPP.
Precisely, yes. And we had the privilege of meeting her a couple of weeks ago in Pune as part of our alumni meetup. And she's part of Simply Sport Foundation. It's an NGO based out of Bangalore. And they were precisely looking at this topic that we're talking about today, about how we can break barriers for women in sports. So there's a pilot study that they conducted, and I'll kind of just pick some points from there. Of course, this is just a pilot study. In another month, or rather a few weeks, we'll be coming up with the final report, and we'll maybe have a discussion with Aditi at that point of time. But the interesting part, the barriers by and large, is that sports has been a place where gender bias has been very kind of obvious. Right? And women in general are discouraged, especially in India, from playing sports because it's believed to be more of male-dominated sort of, or a masculine domain, as they call it. Also, actually, Dr. Tracy Sims, she puts it across nicely, saying that many times the training regimes or the kind of fitness that is expected is that we think that women are small men. But that's just a wrong place to start from, right? Because everywhere from the physiological to the psychological, men are different from women, which means that also many other aspects like the menstrual cycle, when a woman is going through a cycle, and the kind of trainings that a woman is put through during those periods, now we have scientific proof that it has a long-term effect. So that is another area where sometimes women are maybe not given that opportunity because they feel that some of the fitness or the training regimes that are put in place is a bit too difficult for her to go through.
Yeah, difficult or just not appropriate, I would say, right?
Yeah, correct.
I remember you would use this term female athlete triad, right? And
yes.
I'm just reading out the definition. It is an interrelationship of menstrual dysfunction, low energy availability, and decreased bone mineral density. And it is relatively common among young women participating in sports.
Right.
So is this sort of one of the reasons why the training should be designed very differently for women?
Yeah, precisely. Pranay, you hit the nail on the head. The training in the past, like I mentioned, it was always considered, let's say a boy runs 10 rounds, maybe the girls' team would be asked to run 8 rounds. If the boys were asked to lift weights of a certain a number, the women's will be just toned down a bit. So it was all more or less, everything was toned down essentially, right? Yeah.
Same thing, but just do it with less intensity.
Yeah. But that doesn't work that way. And the other thing that was kind of detrimental is because in some sports, there's the expectation that they should be of a certain weight. For example, if somebody wants to get into boxing in a certain category, they might increase their weight so that they can then participate in that category, similar to weightlifting. Whereas other sports like gymnastics or a few other sports which require you to be more lean, you'll try to lose weight, and so that's not your optimal and ideal weight for your stature. But that's not considered, when the training plans are put into place. It also impacts in the long run because when you gain or lose weight consistently over a period of time, it impacts even in the long term, you might develop osteoporosis.
Right.
That's one side effect. And of course, the menstrual cycles also go for a toss. So it might not come regularly. If that doesn't happen, then there's a hormonal imbalance. So it leads to a large number of other, negative effects, which is only recently been understood. So while this is
one broad reason is our training regimen, etc., needs a complete overhaul, a different way of looking at it. But currently we follow the same old style. So maybe that is one barrier, right? And I would assume that would be one barrier, especially for women who want to take a sport seriously, right? What are some other such things you've identified?
The other things would be also, of course, the infrastructure in general, right? Infrastructure and the facilities that's made available. We know that the quality is not the best. And places where it is available, either it's only the private institutions institutes that have set up good quality infrastructure. So not everybody has access to it. We also know that in rural areas, for example, accessing a sports facility, one might have to travel many kilometers. So especially if there's players from rural or the low income bracket, families are not in a position to even think about sending them distance to access those sports facilities, because their primary day-to-day needs have to be first met. Right? So the expenses also that they need to incur. And of course, we need to keep in mind that there's also the safety that comes with women stepping out of their homes and traveling long distances, or even the very fact that it makes them vulnerable to harassment of different kinds. We know even in cities it happens, but in rural areas, they could be exposed to harassment or even gender-based discrimination within their own community if they wear a certain sports gear or certain equipment that they might. We've found, and there are reports, and many things are actually brushed under the carpet, but this is a huge deterrent, because women then don't feel secure enough to kind of actually step out or want to take sports, forget about it as a career option, but even want to kind of attempt playing sports from a fitness or from a leisure kind of perspective also. Of course, family support is very important, because investing in sports is considered a waste of resource by many families. Hence, the many girls who either drop out early or where financial aid is required, they realize that it's not really possible. Of course, like we mentioned about the training, we need to have more scientific training, knowing that during the menstrual cycles, athletes' plan should also change. As in, we have, like, just to give some numbers, 85% of the athletes reported that they had similar training plans as boys. Very similar. So I think that's one thing. And then access to information is another. Now, the country, I think recently, 2017-18, Kalo India scheme was initiated. And that's actually was a very good initiative by the government. And the focus was not just for sports in general, but they also had a separate program for women. So the centers that they have, which is the SAI, the Sports Academic Institutes that were set up, they were focusing on ensuring that the women participation, like they had 46% women and 54% men. And they actually were training more than 2,000 athletes across 21 disciplines. So this initiative has actually if you notice now, it is bearing fruit, in the sense that the recent Commonwealth Games, India finished fourth rank with a medal tally of crossing 60. And the women athletes won actually 26 of those, which is 46% of those medals. So suddenly we're seeing women in the spotlight in sports, and which was not even woman oriented, like if I may put it that way, in the past, like things like weightlifting or boxing. We have many names. Mary Kom is a household name when it comes to boxing. There is, of course, Deepika Kumari in archery. So all these people have come from rural areas. So we know there's evidence that this kind of a scheme or this kind of a push from the government is required. And once we have role models in different disciplines from different areas, it'll be a matter of time before this kind of picks up. And I know it's a long way to go before we can call India a sporting nation, because there are multiple steps that we need to, or levels we need to cross. But this is definitely in the right direction. Long way to go, but yeah, in the right direction.
All right. So these were some of the problems that you identified. Some of them are common both for men and women, especially for example, you said lack of infrastructure or family support, etc. I guess that would be, but there are some unique things also that women face in this, which you highlighted. So let's get to what are the ways in which you can tackle it, right? So the way I see it, there are three parts to this solution, right? Just like there is the state solution, there's a market solution, there's society, right? All three need to play a part in solving it. Definitely. I don't think the government can only solve this, and I don't even think it should be solving this, given that Indian government will have many other challenges which should take priority over sports, right? So yeah, and so I would say the government has some role, the market has some role, and the society as well. So can we just explore those, right? Now, government, when you said about governments trying to encourage the Kalo India, what you said, and there was another scheme, right? TOPS, I think, Target Olympic Podium Scheme. This was another one which started around, I think, 2015, I'm not sure. But the idea was same. They identified a few athletes, and then they said we'll invest in those athletes over a long period so that they will have another opportunity for winning medals. Etc. for India. So it's long-term investment in a few athletes rather than just temporary investment in a large number of
Right.
kids. So what do you think about these kinds of schemes from the government side?
Yeah, I think for long term, definitely these things are required. So if we look at both a short term and a long term approach, the first step would be to kind of also, it's a multi-pronged, right? The government could take the initiative, but people should be, number one, aware of these schemes. Number two, they should be accessible to them. So if you're looking at rural people in the rural areas, much of the time they're not even aware that these schemes exist, that there are opportunities outside of what they currently have in their villages or towns. The other would be if this can be then extended to kind of career options that one could have. And it's not just as athletes. We need to keep in mind that career options in sports could also mean like coaches, and there are a bunch of the supporting staff. So there are a lot of areas that one could kind of take up sports as a career. So if once people are aware of these options, then it might become more viable. But it's definitely a multi-pronged approach. Like, for example, the sports campaign should be started, where the narrative is where you are kind of highlighting the benefits, the people who have achieved, highlight the role models in each of the sports. So people look up to it, and then they kind of start making that transition.
Right. So I think the idea of Khelo India was this attempt to spread this message why sports is important, whereas the aim of TOPS scheme is the other one, right? Where you get role models. So if you see some role models, maybe then it will start a virtuous cycle where more people see Indians excelling in various sports and they also join, right? So I guess TOPS is aimed at that kind of a thing, right? So okay, so this is about governments. Yeah, probably more facilities that are run by SAI, etc., would also help. But yeah, the government cannot reach all villages for sports, given that the government is also struggling to reach on many other fronts also, right? So what is the role for markets and society here as well, right? Now I'm just taking an example. Markets, when I think of two examples, I have one is Decathlon, for example. Just that sporting chain, for this is for sporting equipment, not sports as such, but the fact that your sporting equipment is so easily available and available for so many other sports is such a big boon, right? So when I was growing up, I mean, even in just to get a sporting equipment, you have to go to a shop where there are very few options, and you are just stuck with something, right? But now you have one place where you can get sport equipment, not just for cricket or football, but of a wide variety of things. And so that's like, say, one role that the market can play, where government has allowed FDI to come into this sector, and now we have decathlons, at least in many urban agglomerations. So that's one thing. The other thing is just something like the IPL or city-based leagues which have started, because again, earlier when you have just national teams, so all these sports efforts are basically a power law distribution, right? So there will be some people who will excel, only a few by definition, and there will be a large number of people who will be good but not the best, and they will have no opportunities, right? So now with ideas like the IPL or the Kabaddi league or even the badminton league, the pool of people who can say that they have earned reasonably well and they can make a living just by pursuing sports has increased tremendously, right? Definitely. So you don't need to be in the 11 in the Indian team. You can be one of the 200 who are in some IPL team, and yet you can reasonably be famous and do
come on television and be part of ads. Those are things that people will definitely help the sport.
Correct.
No doubt.
So what are the other things do you think which can, these kinds of solutions from private individuals that can help women in sports?
I think definitely the funding and sponsorship. So from this, we also understand that funding is essential because, for example, if you're targeting the rural area, right, the investment of building sports infrastructure in states will vary based on the state. There are certain states which might require more. So they're underinvested at this point in time. So I think if CSR funds could be, or initiatives could be kind of channelized into these areas, because definitely funds are needed. At least to begin with. And we need to keep in mind that sports, not just as a career option, but I think people, if they start looking at it from a fitness, from a well-being perspective itself, will kind of open up the market a whole lot. And then once you have a market for it, automatically, you'll start getting more companies investing in it. So just to kind of get ourselves into that momentum, India has a lot of potential, for sure. I mean, when you look at even as a sporting nation, right, there's huge potential. We saw that just with the Khelo India, which started in 2017-18, and now in 2022, we've kind of come a long way. And now even the women's cricket team is kind of, people are following the sport. So just to give you a few numbers, women sports viewership in India is around 30, just above 35%. Whereas if you compare that to maybe Australia, which is above 65%. So I think just to kind of get people to view the sport, and then automatically the other things will follow, like, the advertisements and other organizations wanting to kind of fund it. So it's a kind of a cyclic. At the same time, each of these have also a long-term impact. And hopefully at some point in time, once we reach a point where there's enough momentum garnered from this, and sports is also accepted as part of the curriculum. It's not just physical education period that's put aside, and those who are interested kind of get onto the field, and people start seeing the benefit of this fitness for their well-being and as a life skill, right? Because eventually it boosts productivity, self-confidence, even work ethics eventually, because you have to be disciplined if you have to actually play certain sports at a high level. So I think it's a win-win, definitely, but we need to essentially get to that point where it kind of, the momentum itself takes it forward.
Right. So what you said about these solutions, so I would put the CSR bit into what the society can do, right? Rather than what the markets can do, because this philanthropy is one way in which civil society can contribute. And I completely agree. I think, as I said, government in India, given the challenges we have, governments should do, but it won't solve a lot of these things. So we need a lot of efforts in these from a philanthropic initiative, not just CSR. CSR is just one mechanism, but philanthropy coming into areas where government by definition will not invest much because of its other priorities. That's exactly the areas where philanthropy can do a lot more things, right? For example, we can't expect government to put a lot of money into art, culture spending, given our developmental challenges. So again, philanthropic money coming into art, sports, etc. is definitely an area where there is a dire need, and it has the comparative advantage because no one else will be able to do. So CSR, and there have been quite a few initiatives, right, on this, where now there are firms which are working with athletes, working with the government. Even for this top scheme, there were a few Bangalore-based civil society non-profits which were working to identify athletes and also facilities, train them. It's like you are being with them for 6-7 years and helping them through all the challenges, right? So that, I guess, is the role of civil society, right?
Yes, definitely. In fact, few states like Manipur, apparently the communities also obviously a community has a huge role to play here, and there you'll notice that any sports, there are a lot of girls who participate, and there are a lot of women who come to watch them or to kind of egg them on. So I think just the whole community being involved in kind of encouraging not just women, but also not just the girls, but the boys as well. I think in general that makes a difference, because the society, as you know, in India, right, the society can be detrimental when it comes to women being involved in certain areas like sports, which is not considered your part of your, especially in smaller towns, right? So here, if the community gets involved and the girls are backed by their society, right, it makes a big difference, because and many of them have a huge potential. Like I mentioned, if you look at many of these sports persons who have come up recently and won medals, they all are from small towns where facilities would have been essentially non-existential. But
I think one good thing that happened, even though we criticize BCCI on many things, I mean, personally I do, but BCCI recently announced that women and men will get equal pay.
The match fee is equal in cricket, but of course the contracts, that's a different thing. But at least the good first step. Definitely, it'll encourage. You've seen women cricket been in the news over the last couple of years, and the team has been doing well. Right, so it's one thing feeds into the other. With that encouragement, with the money that comes in, they also get motivated. You'll definitely see more younger women taking this up as a career option, knowing that you can make a career out of it. Right? That there is the money.
So I'm always wary of cultural definitions, because culture also changes, right? It's not as if we are static. We have also changed we ourselves as human beings have changed over the last 15 years. Forget culture. Over a long term, anything is possible. But there are quite a few differences. For example, the way Australia is in sport compared to UK itself. Now, forget other countries with different path dependencies. But even in Australia, I've heard many people from the UK say how Australia, the perception of sports is very different. Their
Right.
PM keeps talking about cricket
Right.
and all that. The former umpires, there's a former umpire called Simon Toffel, you will
Right.
remember.
Right.
He's now an advisory in an investment firm and things like that. So people make interesting switches based on what they've done in sports, right? That becomes which you don't see in many other places. So I don't know, what is your thinking about the role of society? Is there something called a sporting culture, or is it built over time, or what is it?
Yeah, I think it's definitely built over time, and that's why it's a multi-pronged approach. If a country does want to kind of move in that direction, the narrative, it should be coming from everywhere, right? Like the government too should be taking a stance on where sports is in their agenda. The community too should get involved. But eventually, I think if there is a demand for it, definitely the supply will kind of come in. So India definitely has the potential. I think we've proven it in the past, but it's just that we need to ensure the numbers. Everyone, once they jump onto the bandwagon, so to speak, they'll start seeing sports as something that should be essentially a part of their life. Right?
And I think there's a role of economic growth here as well. If there is more prosperity, then people would want to try different things, because there is, as you said, the cycle has to kick in, but the virtuous cycle, more people will have to take risks, go into different careers, and that depends on what your economic condition is as well, right? So I guess those are also things. So government first picking up short-term targets like tops, etc., in order to set role models, and also pursuing a path where there is more economic growth can open up these opportunities for many people, right? It's not as if everything has to be directed by the government.
Correct.
Markets will work, people will want, as you said, if demand is created in some way, then the supply follows. So the great talking to you, Malathi, about this. Do you have any other things you want to add?
No, I think, of course, we will be talking more about the sports policy and what are the options and some of the recommendations, maybe in a few episodes, ATP episodes that follow. But I think overall, if we all within our own networks, right, kind of have that positive spin to what sports is and what it can do for us, I think let's start there. I think we need to start somewhere. Communities is the best place to start. People we're familiar with. And then, it should take its course.
Right, absolutely. So this is one area where civil society has a big role to play.
Definitely, yes.
And with that message, we'll say Khelo India, and we'll end this episode. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Pranay.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.